conventions affect communicative success and rhetorical effectiveness? These questions only make sense if one refuses to negotiate with writers and their texts. For those who actively engage in negotiating, meaning, form, and content are what they mutually make of them in their situated interaction. Thank you.
For that rich presentation. We're ready for your questions and observations and comments.
Who would like to be first?
Thank you so much for your presentation. This is very fascinating research. One of the things that jumps out at me is the homogeneous nature of the group that you work with, the refugee group. And so I'm interested in how you would change, like for example, that last slide there, the last point, the teacher, there. The teacher as facilitator of negotiations in a classroom in which students have many experiences of English indeed. Sure. And so to what degree do those negotiations are the blind leading the blind, and to what degree can they work towards reaching something interesting about English that might be useful?
Yeah, I would say that in that context, negotiation becomes even more important, and the focus on how to negotiate across that difference becomes even more important. So, so using student writing examples, like the sentence that got brought up in this, not in the slide, but in the handout, using examples of diverse students from diverse student backgrounds, their papers, as a grounded example of the different ways people are negotiating grammar conventions and concepts, I think would be one way to go. I think you could apply some of the basic principles of multilingual writing that that involve negotiation in a class as mixed as what you're talking about. And I think to surprising effects, and maybe it would even be more exciting because of the difference, the rich difference in that kind of context. So,
yes. In Nepal, even at the higher level, English language instruction and English literature instruction is done in Nepali. So Byron will be taught in Nepali with the English text in front. And we're talking about, So in terms of deviancy, like how far you go, and so at what point do students actually learn English?
Right.
Is the question. And one of the problems in Nepal is that often the teachers who are teaching even university students have such poor English language skills that the students themselves come away with very poor language skills.
Right. So I would say on one extreme end of that, and that would be Conor Groucho's work in translingual writing, and he's an applied linguistic theorist who's actively thinking about English and lingua franca contexts and how can divergent forms of English be used in the classroom and that kind of thing. And he's on the most extreme end. I think what he would say is that that English in that context is actively being created. It's actively emerging. So the question of whether or not it's right or wrong, or a poor or a strong form of English is moot because it's an emerging form of English that we don't know whether it's the strongest or the weakest form. But then, as teachers, our responsibility is to provide students with skills that we know will make them successful later on down the road. And then also there's this issue that the students themselves are invested in a particular variety of English. So I would say that a negotiated model doesn't have to be all or nothing. It could be a stepping stone for some students who are really struggling in a class, and for teachers who are really struggling teaching their students to hook them. So it could be a way of hooking students and building relationship with students. It doesn't have to be sort of all or nothing.
From your second example, your selection from the student essay, it seems that students themselves might have a hard time being won over to your model.
Yes.
I'm extrapolating from a single example, so that may be an overstatement, but it just seems to me that, as you just said, students come in with the expectation that they'll lose their accent, lose the inflections that make them seem non-native speakers, and be able to assimilate within a larger community of English speakers. So how do you get them past their own skepticism about the value of bringing their own regional specificity to bear?
So that's such a great question, and I think it's a question a lot of people in cross-language relations and composition are grappling with right now. But I would say it's in the scaffolding and the structuring of the course. I mean, a lot of students they're coming with a frame of reference that English is the better language and I want that language, and not really thinking critically about their own positionality as multilingual users of language and valuing their own experiences in their own languages, running after this prestige variety. And so I think that one way of helping students critically engage with their relationship to language is through texts that show that non-standard varieties are publishable varieties, and that really excellent and amazing literature and writing can come out of this kind of work. And so there's a text, I have not used it in my class, because like you said, I tried out, well, this student example came from my classroom. And so I was trying out this notion of translingual literacy in my class, and I wanted to get a sense of the students for it or against it. And without any prompting really from me, or without any sort of grounding in the literature from me, they were immediately like, no. But perhaps if I had introduced, writing from people like Gloria Anzaldúa, or Amy Tan, or Juno Diaz, or Sherman Alexie, or Suresh Kanagaraja, he has a literacy narrative that would be appropriate for lower levels of students. Maybe that could start some critical conversation around the usefulness of multilingual writing. Yes?
I'm interested very much in this translingual approach, but I wonder about its limitations in an American academic setting when we consider what you're calling prestige forms of English. I might refer to as standard American English and academic English, which has certain grammatical and rhetorical norms and conventions, which are not the same as what would be negotiated in conversational practice,
right.
In a casual setting or in a non-academic setting, right? And would also be different from fiction, right? Which were the examples you just gave for the most part. I would also say that that's also significantly different from dialects of global English, as in Singapore, which, yeah, of course, are publishable in certain forms, right, and contexts. Yeah. But in the context of the American academic institution and students who are going to be leaving our multilingual classroom and enrolling in courses whose professors don't give a crap about translingual approach, right? Like, what do you do with that?
Yeah, I mean, that's the challenge that a lot of scholars are talking about right now. I think what translingual writing does right now is that it offers an alternative. It offers another kind of possibility among many possibilities. And so I think the point that you're making is extremely valid, and that, like, absolutely our primary concern is helping students, with their own personal language investments, and then helping them to build the skills that they'll need to transfer outside of our classes into other classes. But I think that we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, I guess, and that translingual writing could be a great example of one of multiple discourse. So it's of introducing various discourses in the classroom and then asking students why they would choose one or the other. So I think it can be used as a tool and doesn't necessarily have to be like an all or nothing sort of, you know, only do translingual writing and nothing else. I think at this point, because it's so new and it's so emergent, that what it's doing right now is it's just offering another way of thinking about some of these issues that you're bringing up.
I want to ask you a little bit about what's the third point here?
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry about that.
Assess the process of negotiating class-language relations, not just the product. Are you suggesting that there would not be products, or are you talking about scaffolding that would lead to the kind of product we would ask of all students in first year writing?
I think one thing that comment sort of responds to is the teacher who gets a piece of paper like this and doesn't really, or like the example that's shown on the back of your handout, and doesn't really know what to do with it because the first gut reaction goes to the end product, and the end product doesn't look like what is expected. And so I think what a translingual orientation or multilingual orientation, something that's sensitive to the multilingual writers, what that provides is a way of thinking not just about the end product, but the process that went into that, and that some of these grammar issues that we're seeing at the sentence level are markers of active negotiation, not just laziness or, so I think it's not just we should ignore the product altogether and only focus on the process. I think it's asking us to think about not just thinking about the end result.
Okay, so you're not.
No, it's not one or the other.
You're not using assess in that sentence.
Assess.
You evaluate.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
How would you train people who see themselves primarily as literary scholars to be facilitators of negotiation?
That's a really great question.
25 words in it.
The committee is awaiting your answer.
Yeah. Wow. Well, see, I would think that people who are literary scholars would really take up the notion of translingual writing and the kind of literature that's being produced these days with that kind of writing. So we were actually talking earlier about a text that I have not used in my class, but it's gaining some traction in the scholarship. I know the title. The author, maybe, I don't know, it's escaping me, but the title is Rotten English, right? And it's a literary anthology. So introducing some of those texts in the class to engage students in critical conversation, I think would be something that literary scholars would really take up, and then could really help to connect up reading and writing in the classroom in interesting ways. So that would be one answer. And then another answer is, how do you ever train teachers to be teachers of writing? I mean, I think it comes back sometimes to some tried and true principles about, setting up writing workshops and doing peer review and how does that work. It works slightly differently in a multilingual classroom because you're dealing with these issues of convention and form, and grammar becomes very important. But the same basic principles, I think, still apply.
I want to ask a sort of a follow-up to a number of the kinds of questions that we've heard around the room, concerned with this idea of norms and product, and the ability of students to go from your classroom to successfully integrate into other disciplines, classrooms. Because what I thought I heard you saying during the talk was that the theoretical stakes for you of this project is the possibility that exactly those norms will shift as we listen to and become sort of infiltrated by translingual possibilities and affordances that aren't in academic conventional writing as it is right now. Am I right in that?
I mean, I think that could be one possibility, and certainly with the publication of this literary anthology, Rotten English, and also with a lot of work that's going on in cross-language relations and composition today, I would say that there is a movement towards valuing those new emergent world Englishes and global English forms that are being actively created and recognizing those things for their own very real grammar systems, you know, as legitimate varieties of English. So I think so. I think there's a big shift, a big epistemological shift happening right now in cross-language relations and composition, and I think these issues are just markers of that big shift.
I'm trying to imagine there are many, an increasing number of champions of translingual approaches, but I'm guessing a lot of, say, graduate students writing dissertations on this don't bring the enormous wealth of ethnographic experience in Nepal that you bring. And when all is said and done, what do you think maybe that ethnographic experience has either, above all, taught you or confirmed for you, or challenged you to rethink, right, that somebody without that ethnographic experience might not be engaged in?
Well, I think one big thing for me was the issue of multimodality and the way that language practice was embodied, and the various sorts of artifacts and performances and artistry that were connected to learning to read and write in a print-based medium. So prior to having spent a lot of time, not as a teacher, but as an observer, as a participant observer of this very different space than what I was used to, those were some of the things that I took note of. And then seeing those things in action in Nepal helped me to think back on my experiences as a teacher in Tucson, when students would present me with various artifacts or things in the classroom, and I was like, what is this? What's going on here? Why are you giving me cardamom pods? And then realizing that that was very much a part of this woman's history in Bhutan, and you know, she's connecting that to the language experience that we're having in the class. They're connected in some way. And so that did not become clear to me until I spent a lot of time doing ethnographic work in the home.
Other questions or comments? I want to remind you of Catherine's teaching presentation tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the Gray Room on the 4th floor of Valentine. But meanwhile, shall we all thank Kate?